is Julie Sullivan, and I do the mentor training and support for the Quivira Coalition New Agrarian Program. And this is, we're coming into the tail end of the series of calls we do every fall and winter in order to support our incoming mentors. And we also make these calls available to people outside of our program, and we do have someone on the call today. So sometimes my comments will be more specific for people in the New Agrarian Program, which we refer to as NAP. And sometimes I'll try to make those comments a little more broad for people who aren't part of our program. So this call, I think, starts to really dive into how do we actually deliver an educational program when we all have more than full-time jobs just trying to run our farms and ranches. And I think that this is probably one of the ongoing challenges for mentors is no matter how many years you've been doing this, it can be a real challenge to fit in some very intentional educational time to bring your apprentice up to speed and keep them learning new skills throughout, excuse me, throughout the entire 8 months. And this isn't one of those places where I think being an employer and being a mentor really starts to sort of emerge, which is that a lot of times when we employ somebody on our farms or ranches, we're employing them for a particular set of skills. And once they're up to speed on those, that's it. We aren't going to spend a whole lot of one-on-one time with them, probably encouraging them to continue to develop skills. Now, some employers are like that. They're deeply invested in moving their employees forward professionally, but that's not necessarily an expectation or a requirement. With a program like ours, this actually is an expectation and a requirement that as a mentor, you will periodically be introducing your apprentice to new skills, helping them develop those skills, recognizing that they aren't going to become competent in everything you probably present to them in the course of 8 months. But ideally, they're having the opportunity to get a pretty broad sweep of opportunities of what it takes in order to run an operation like yours. So that's really what we're going to dive in today, are some of the ways that we've found over the 15 years of this program, some of the sort of tricks and tools that mentors have developed that have helped them figure out how to fit in that educational intention and time to an already busy life. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that? All right. So, one of the things that I always like to sort of remind people of is, you've gone through this interview process, this application process. You probably had a lot of very enthusiastic people with varying ranges of skills or understanding about what they were actually applying to. But the fact is that once you've chosen somebody, they are just full of delight and enthusiasm. They're probably also a little overwhelmed and a little scared. So it really is sort of like having a puppy in a whirlwind. You have this individual who's going to be arriving on your site, incredibly excited, incredibly ready, sort of emotionally to dive in. They're also going to be quite overwhelmed. We talked in an earlier call about the fact that these are people who are leaving the people they know, the places they've been living, jobs they're familiar with, and they're coming into an environment that for a lot of them is very new. They don't know you, they don't know your operation, they probably aren't going to be particularly skilled and useful initially, and so they're going to feel disoriented. They're going to be worried that you'll be disillusioned and feel like you made a mistake in hiring them. And it's also true that for the most part, the people who apply to the New Agrarian Program aren't used to living in extremely rural communities. And that in and of itself is disorienting for them. So you have this wonderful person arriving, they want to do a good job, they want to be useful, and they're going to be so overwhelmed that it's going to be really hard for them to become useful right away. So what is it that you can do to help them? So I really like this quote, and it's something that I have learned to take to heart. I'm one of those people that I have a tendency to assume that when things are not going well on our ranch, it's because of a people problem. Somebody is disappointed, somebody is angry, somebody is disillusioned. And I think that that tends to be true for a lot of us, that if things aren't going well, we assume that it's a personality issue, that this person, and I hear people say this, I think it comes out of our mouths. Oh, this person doesn't have a work ethic. Oh, this person, doesn't understand what it takes to make a life in agriculture. Oh, this person is lazy. Oh, this person is entitled. I think that there tends to be a lot of that kind of conversation. And that may or may not be true. But the fact is that none of us can achieve our best if we're functioning within a system that doesn't support us achieving our best. So as a leader, as a boss, it actually is on you to create the systems and the processes that allow the people who work with you and for you to achieve their best outcomes. They aren't in the position of power to change a system that's not working, but you are. So I think Edward Deming, who was he's considered sort of the founding father of organizational development and consulting. He's the person who basically helped bail out the Japanese auto industry, for those of us who are old enough to remember that in the past century. And he's a pretty brilliant person when it comes to thinking about what is the role of creating systems that allow people to thrive. So that's really what we're going to be talking about during this call. So one of the things that I think is true, but is often invisible for a lot of us, is the fact that we actually have three very important systems that are going on our operations. And you all probably have a lot of these systems in place. You may have a lot more than a lot of other people do. But I'm just going to briefly review these. So one of them is your production system. That's how do you decide what you're going to raise, whether that's crops or livestock or both? How do you raise it? What are the practices you use? And who are your consultants? Who are your resources? Who are the people who help you make really good decisions so that you're raising a really fine, wonderful, amazing item? More than likely, you have a fair number of resources for this, whether these are podcasts, whether these are crop consultants, whether these are just the fact that you've invested in your genetics of your livestock, and so your livestock themselves are supporting you to do a good job. So most of you probably have a lot of resources that help you do a really great job raising what you raise. Once you're raising something really wonderful, you need to turn it into money in order to be able to have a viable operation. More than likely, all of you have really solid financial systems. You more than likely have an accountant. You might have a financial advisor. You might be involved with holistic management, financial planning, or ranching for profit, or some other sort of think tank and management board that helps you make really good decisions. You probably have some sort of bookkeeping system, whether that's QuickBooks or something else, so that you're able to track income and expenses and know whether you're actually achieving the targets you need to achieve in order to have a viable business. So you're raising something wonderful. You're turning it into money. Now the whole thing can fall apart if we don't pay attention to the third system, which is the relational system. Who are your customers? Who are your suppliers? Who works with you? Who works for you? Who are the people you rely on in order to make your business work? Most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about this part of our operation. And for a lot of us, we also don't have a lot of support or a lot of resources for this. I think this is starting to change. I think that agriculture in general is starting to have more resources for mental and emotional health, helping us develop our leadership skills. But for a lot of us, this is the place where we really struggle. So again, I like to assume that a lot of you have really good systems in place that work for you. The trick is whether they're going to work for somebody who's entering your operation, who's more or less a novice. One of the things that I know I learned when I came here and joined George on the ranch 22 years ago was he grew up doing this. Like it was so deeply embedded in his being, how he did what he did every day, how he looked at his animals, how he looked at his grass, how he moved fence, how he handled water points. He didn't even know how to explain it to somebody else. Like he'd never had to put it in words. And I think that's one of the challenges we sometimes face when we have apprentices coming, is that we have to learn how to communicate the things that are in our brain. You know, George was used to running a ranch all by himself. He'd wake up in the morning, look out the mirror, and decide what he was going to do. I mean, for some of you, that may be the way that you run your ranch. More than likely, that's not going to be effective for your apprentice. They're going to need to have a little bit more overt awareness of what's going on day to day, week to week. So these are the systems that we have found in the New Agrarian Program that are really beneficial for mentors to have. And again, you may have some of these already in place and they just might need a little tweaking. Some of these might be new to you. So orientation, I know last month we talked about the value of really having a focused orientation or onboarding week so that you make sure you have a lot of time and energy to really get your apprentice oriented to your location. We'll talk briefly about that in a minute. A ranch calendar, I also talked a little bit about that last month. We'll talk about that a little bit more thoroughly, about the value of really having things written down in some sort of calendar format, not only for this week, but sort of for the weeks to come. That really helps your apprentice understand the workflow and start to think ahead about where they can be useful and what they need to be learning now in order to be useful 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road. Regular team meetings. This is something some ranches and farms already have in place. Some of them kind of do it more ad hoc. We really recommend that this becomes something that's more intentional and is done on a weekly basis. It really makes a huge difference for the apprentice, and that makes a huge difference for you. Check-ins. This is one of the things that's probably significantly different for mentors than it is for employers. We really do ask and require our mentors to regularly check in with their apprentice, not just sort of the, hey, how's it working with that tractor, but the, how do you feel you're doing? Where do you feel you're learning? Are there places where when I give you instructions, I give you so much information, you're confused? We're really checking in with them about how the education is going, not necessarily just about how the work is going. And then skills sheet. This is a requirement in our program, and I'll talk today a little bit about creating your skills sheet. And then in the March call, we'll talk more thoroughly about how to actually utilize this. So it isn't just a checklist or a kind of annoying task that you have to do, but it's really something that creates dynamic conversation and the ability for your apprentice to become self-motivated. So I'm just going to briefly go over this because we talked about this more in depth last month. But again, just orientation, onboarding. These are the things that I recommend people think about including in that first 7 to 10 days, giving them maps, driving around with them, making sure they understand sort of like when you're referring to the Forbes field, well, what the heck field is that? So that next week, when you tell them, hey, go out to the Forbes field and check the water point or look at the fences, they have some way of knowing what you're talking about. So again, maps and driving around with them is a good way to do that. Work alongside them. Just because they say they know how to do something doesn't mean they do. And it also doesn't mean they know how to do it the way you want it done. So try to build in the opportunity to work alongside them, or send them out to do a task they say they're able to do, and then go check it with them so that it doesn't feel like a test, but it's more you're just making sure they do it the way you want it done. Show them what a good job means. Like, is the electric fence tight? Did they remember to turn the charger back on? Those kinds of little details that can be things that they can forget. Take some time to discuss kind of why you do what you do and why it matters to you. Understanding the why will help them understand why those annoying little pesky details like keeping the fence hot are important. I recommend driving with them, making sure that they're going to take good care of your potentially cranky ranch and farm vehicles. You'll do your first skills sheet meeting and then try to spend a little social time with them. So did anybody have any questions or additional ideas about things to include in orientation or onboarding before I move forward? Okay. All right, calendars. I know I talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to go a little more in depth right now. So one of the reasons I really recommend calendars is that there are going to be days when you are really busy and you may be able to do like a 5-minute check-in with your apprentice or your intern when they show up at the ranch, but you may not be able to actually make sure they understand what the priorities are for that day or that week, or what are the things they should be thinking about getting prepared for, because that's something that's coming up in a handful of days or the following week. Having things written down in some sort of a calendar format, whether that's virtual or on a whiteboard or a piece of flip chart paper, that is one of the top organizational tools that's going to really help your apprentice arrive at work every day and kind of get their brain oriented to where your brain is so that they get off to a good start every single day. So these are two of the calendars that we have used at our ranch, and then I'll show you another one. So we do use a Google Calendar. And this is a Google Calendar, obviously, from 2 years ago for when the apprentice showed up. I know it's pretty small. It's probably hard to read all the detail, but this will go out in the notes from the call and you can see it more clearly. We like to put down not only what's happening on the ranch, but we also put in meetings that George or I have, because that way the apprentice knows that there are some days and some times of day when we are not available. And they need to make sure that they've been lined out, they're oriented, they've asked their questions before those meetings happen. So it helps them help you make them useful. We also make sure that we put on here anything that they may have that's a personal thing. Do they need to go get new tires on their vehicle? Do they have a dentist appointment? Do they have some sort of a phone call that's going to be happening during the workday? And we know to schedule around that. So when we have our weekly team meeting here at the ranch, we put everything that comes up into a Google Calendar. It took George in particular a while to get used to using a Google Calendar. He and I are old enough that we're not digital natives. But now that we have this and we have it on our phones, it really helps us stay organized and helps us know, well, when is the apprentice having a day off? Or, oh my gosh, I have a day that's full of meetings. I need to send a text to my apprentice at 7:30 this morning to make sure that they understand what the day's obligations and priorities are. So it helps you be organized too. The other calendar, which is sort of month by month, is something that I know I talked about last month. This really helps your apprentice understand that certain skills are learned at certain times of the season, and they won't be bugging you to be learning something when it's not really something that's built into the workflow of that month or that season. And again, this will just go out with the notes, and you can look at those a little more in detail and see if you think those will be beneficial for you. What I do want to talk about is this. So this is messy, and it's probably really hard to read, but this is kind of the nerve center for us for our ranch. So again, when we have a team meeting, we do it in front of a big whiteboard, and as you can tell, we have 5 weeks at a time. So obviously the priority when we're talking is the current week, but sometimes what's happening in the current week is related to what's happening in the next week. And so this is a way where we start to get the apprentice oriented to not only what needs to happen today, what's on their plate today or this week, but how can they be thinking ahead in order to be figuring out where they can fit in and be useful. So let's say that you have an apprentice who they have their duties for the day and they get done at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but they're supposed to work until 5:30. You're busy. You don't have time to show them something else or give them a new project. You may not even be at the rancher farm that day. You may have been called away for some reason. So how are they going to fill up that next 2 hours? Well, they can look at a calendar and see something like this. So on the second week down, On February 11th, so Thursday, at the top, it says in red, 4 to Salazar. That was that 4 animals were going to Salazar Processing for our direct marketing business. That meant that at 6 o'clock in the morning on that Thursday, the tires needed to be aired up, the truck needed to have been checked, the trailer needed to be hooked up, the trailer tires needed to be checked. More than likely, it would be snowing. They were going to need to leave early in the morning. The processor is an hour and a half away. So that truck needs to be ready to go before Thursday. Well, an apprentice could look at this calendar and go, okay, well, I have some time on my hands. I can get that truck and trailer ready. Nobody needs to tell me to do that. I can see that that is a need that the ranch has. It's something I actually know how to do. And I can go ahead and do that. I can take that off my mentor's shoulders. I can be useful. So that's one of the reasons why demonstrating to your apprentice sort of not just the week's priorities, but sort of having some place where they can see what's coming up can help them start to figure out where they fit in. Similarly, if you had something coming up in a week or two and they didn't actually know how to do that task, you could take 15 minutes and show them how to do it, and then they can take it off your plate. So calendars aren't just a way to help them be oriented. It really is a way for you to be able to help that apprentice take things off your shoulders. So I'm going to go on to team meetings, but were there any questions or input about how people might use calendars already on your operations?
Julie,
Mm-hmm.
do you have day-to-day stuff, that you're feeding every day?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that on the calendar? Or is that just kind of assumed that would just clutter it off, or irrigating?
Well, we don't have something that we do every day. Like this time of year, every day somebody goes out and checks the various herds and makes sure that what we had on the pasture plan is working. They're not hungry, they have enough. So that's not on the calendar. But if it was a day when, say, we were feeding supplement, or a day when we knew we probably needed to check the mineral, we would potentially have that on the calendar because it's not a daily duty. So that's the way we work with it. Anything that's kind of a daily duty that the apprentice does, after that first week or two, they know that that's their top priority, and we don't feel the need to put it on the calendar. We might talk about it at the team meeting, particularly if it's something that we think is going to be more time consuming. Anything that was like a move from pasture to pasture, initially we would put that on the calendar because that's part of the training we're trying to do with the apprentice, which is, the pasture plan said that these animals could be in here for 4 days. I want you to check it on day 3. I want you to really walk the whole thing, see what you think about whether there's enough forage for another day, because if we need to do that pasture move a day early, we want to know that. So that's the kind of thing we might put in. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. So team meetings, this is another thing that I think really made a difference for us when we started doing this. Like I said, George had been running this place by himself. He was used to just getting up in the morning, drinking a cup of coffee and looking out the window and going, what do I think needs to be done? It was second nature to him. He'd done it every day of his life. Even when I came to the ranch, I didn't grow up in agriculture. We needed to actually have a little bit more of a conversation on a regular basis about what was going on. So I'm going to show you a couple of sample agendas for team meetings, but this is hands down one of the best things to try to incorporate if you don't already do this. And the more frequently you do it, the less time it takes. We find that we can do a team meeting in an hour. If we go too long, if we wait 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, then the meeting takes more time. So just trying to make it a normal part of the routine really can be beneficial. So we sit down every either Sunday or Monday, depending on what people's days off are. And we obviously review the week's priorities. We try to identify where the apprentice is already capable of going out and doing a skill by themselves. Again, they may arrive with some skills where you can just send them out on their own right away, or it may be that it's going to be a couple of weeks before you can send them out on their own. But as soon as you can start assigning things to them. Training and review. Is there something coming up that they need to be able to do? Let's say that you have a permanent fence that has a broken H brace, and that's going to need to be replaced. Well, you might need to either plan to do that with your apprentice or review how an H brace is built, if they say they've done it before, so that you know you can send them out to do it by themselves. So again, is there something coming up where you need to do some sort of training or review so that the apprentice is lined out? What's coming up next? I just talked about that. Like, what are the things that are happening in a couple of weeks? Is there something that you need to be training your apprentice to do? Is there someone else on your staff who can do that? Is there perhaps some self-study they can do? Let's say that you have, you're going to have them start to work on a tractor that they haven't been driving before. You could give them the tractor manual and tell them you want them to review that and read that in the course of the next 2 weeks, so that when you actually take them out physically and orient them to the tractor and get them started, they've got a pretty good idea, hopefully, of what that machine is like. So that's the kind of thing, thinking ahead a little bit. That way you've given them something to do when you're too busy to be working with them. Something else that can go on the team meeting is when are you available? When are you not available? So mentor time that you can spend with them, solo time when they're working by themselves. And then if they're in our program, they do actually have other requirements periodically. In particular, they have a supplemental education call in the evening once a month that they are required to attend. So you'd want to have that on the calendar so that you and the apprentice both remember that they need to get off work early enough to be able to sit down in front of a Zoom screen by 6 o'clock at night to do that supplemental education call. And then just that seasonal flow, like I said, this is a great opportunity for you to be able to talk about why you do what you do when you do it. One of the reasons they've come to you is they really are deeply curious about your operation and about you and about the way you do things. And a weekly team meeting just gives you that point of contact in order to be able to kind of feed their curiosity. And the more you feed their curiosity, the more devoted and motivated they're going to be. So here's just a couple of ways people I know have designed meeting agendas. And if any of you have really good team meeting agenda ideas, I'd love to know them. I think the more we can cross-fertilize in our operations, the better we all get. So something George and I did for quite a number of years is we sort of did what we called the Stephen Covey knockoff agenda. So for those of you who are familiar with Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he has this important, urgent kind of quadrant that he recommends people use in order to kind of organize themselves. And so there's one category, which are what are the things that are urgent and important? Those are obviously the top priorities. And then you have a quadrant, which are what are the things that are important, but not urgent? Those can be things like, you have a meeting in 2 weeks and you need to do some preparation for it. It's not urgent. It doesn't have to happen this week, but it's going to be urgent in 2 weeks. So if you can fit it in this week, that would be good. And then he has 2 other quadrants of urgent but not important, and then not important and not urgent. I'll send out a little more information about that if that's intriguing to you. What we did is we created urgent, important, important, not urgent, and then we identified action items. What are the things that have to happen this week and who's going to do them? And this was another way that we started to create some autonomy and responsibility for the apprentice, was making sure they understood specifically what actions were assigned to them or that they volunteered for. So I'll send out a sample of how we used this with the notes. I'm organizing by topic. I think this is the way a lot of ranches do it. They sort of have a livestock update or a crop update, vehicle update. Is something needing an oil change? Does something need new tires? Does something maybe need to go to the shop? Big work days. Do you have a big transplant day or a big field work day or a big cattle move day coming up? Any kind of prep you need to do this week for next week? Town errands. This is one that a lot of people forget to do, but for a lot of us, we live quite a ways from town. So trying to download what are all of the supplies we need from town this week. So whoever goes, particularly if you send your apprentice, they have a list of all of the things they're supposed to make sure they get. And then if you have time, it's really nice to have just a 5-minute, what do we feel went well this week? And what are the things we wish could go better? That's like a little mini check-in. And a number of our mentors have tried to build that in. That just kind of helps you take a pulse on how the people on your team are doing, including you. It's good for your apprentice to know whether you felt like you had a good week or you felt like you had a week where you were overwhelmed. It helps you be human to them. And then another way that some mentors like to do it is they start with that kind of 5-minute personal highlight. What was your highlight last week? And particularly asking the apprentice that, helping to sort of acknowledge the successes, acknowledging the wins that they have. Remember, people tend to stay motivated if they feel like they're doing a good job. So that's an opportunity for them to acknowledge where they feel like they're learning and growing, or for you to be able to give them a compliment, tell them a place where you feel like they're really improving. Taking time, 5 minutes, do they have a lot of questions or do they need some review about something from last week? And then sitting down and outlining the priorities and setting duties. So I think all of this is kind of, very obvious to us, but we may or may not actually do these things. I really highly recommend that you figure out some sort of a system that's going to work for you that you can also include your apprentice in. So this just helps you download your brain to the apprentice. It helps them begin to understand like what are the busy weeks? What are the slower weeks? That will help them figure out the ways in which they can be helpful. And like I said before, the other thing about having a team meeting and having those calendars is it helps them, if they end up with time on their hands during the workday, they can look at those agenda items and priorities that you established during the team meeting or on the calendar and figure out what's something that they can do. Maybe we need to inventory fence handles because somebody's going to town later this week and we think we've got a lot of broken ones. So do we only have 2 in the fencing bucket or do we have 15? Do we need to buy some more? Those are the kinds of things they can do for you. And I've found that it really helps us be a more organized ranch to make sure that we kind of have that, what do you do when you don't have anything to do list for the apprentice. So I'm going to go on to skills sheets, but did anybody have any other thoughts about team meetings or questions? Okay. This is kind of what I want to spend the most time on. So skills sheets are something that are required in the new agrarian program, and they're required for a couple of reasons. Number one, the education that you're offering is part of the apprentice's compensation. The reason they applied to the program and they are coming to work for you is that there's been a commitment that in exchange for their labor and their effort and their energy, you're going to invest in teaching them. And so a skills sheet will help you do that. It'll help you kind of outline what you're going to teach, what you're going to expose them to. It will help both of you stay kind of focused on making sure that the education is happening throughout the season. It also is protection for you if for some reason somebody ever worked for you inside the new agrarian program and then they came back and said that they were taken advantage of, that they didn't actually get education. The fact that you have a skills sheet and you can demonstrate that you sat down with them periodically at least 3 times in the season and talked very concretely about where they're improving and planning the next steps for their skills development, you can demonstrate that you did make a commitment to their education. So there are multiple reasons to do, but I think the best reason is that it promotes really remarkable conversation. This is the thing that George and I like best about it, is that when we sit down with an apprentice and talk to them about how they're developing as land stewards, how they're learning how to read the landscape and do pasture assessments, how they're learning how to understand animal behavior, it develops this just wonderful relationship with one another. It really feeds our souls. And it really helps us understand who the apprentice is and how we can best support them. So there are multiple reasons to do a skills sheet. And then there on the other side of the screen is just a really simple example of what a skills sheet looks like. So some mentors do very detailed skills sheets. Other mentors do relatively streamlined skills sheets. I'm going to show you the one we use, which is quite detailed. But in the notes, I'll send out one that's much more streamlined, as well as one with detail. And you can kind of pick and choose and figure out what kind of, how much detail is really going to be useful for you. So the one that you're looking at right now is a land management and stewardship skill sheet. We have a sheet for a number of different kinds of skills. We use holistic management on our ranch, so we have a place where we want them to become familiar with the basics of how holistic management talks about land. Ecological processes, basic soil health, plant ID and assessment. And then this is actually from a different operation than ours that had a greenhouse and had chickens. So these were the things that they had on their skills sheet. And you'll notice that there's sort of a baseline column where the apprentice fills in something and the mentor fills in something, and then there's comments. And that's the process that happens 3 times in the course of the season. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this screen and share my skills sheet with you. So this is going to probably be a little hard to read because it's small, and I apologize for that. But like I said, this will go out in the notes. So this is the animal husbandry skills sheet in our operation. And this is an actual skill sheet from an apprentice. So it has all of our comments and all of the scoring. And again, next month we'll talk more about the actual process of scoring and making comments. So for right now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but I just want you to see on the left side, at least it's the left side of my screen, it says animal husbandry, and then it has a list of 16 things. So for us, again, like I said, we have a very detailed skills sheet. These are all of the things we want to expose our apprentice to in the course of the 8 months. We know that they won't develop mastery, probably in any of them, but we hopefully are going to get them close to the point where they would be capable of daily operations in most of these things. So we have first observations, just as you're walking out to the pasture, is there an animal standing alone? Are they all clumped together? Is anybody upside down? Like what are the first things you notice? Basic safety. Feeding, watering, moving, herding, animal handling, health diagnosis, breeding, calving, castrating, branding, culling. We have been a certified organic operation, so we had certain field protocols about health treatments and things that were part of our organic protocol, and then nutritional needs and mineral. So that's a skills sheet. Again, you don't need to have it be that detailed, but you want to figure out what are all of the things you want your apprentice to be realizing they need to be thinking about when it comes to taking care of animals. And you're probably going to want to figure out a way to name the most critical pieces of that. And that would go in your skills sheet. So I'm just going to go across this. So we have a land management and stewardship one. So this is the one that talks about soil health, plant ID, pasture management, monitoring. We have one on horsemanship because we do use horses in our operation. Tools and equipment. So this is something all the way from can they back up a truck to can they change a tire? Can they actually troubleshoot a solar fence charger? So those are all of the things that we have on that skills sheet. The animal husbandry one is the one I showed you. Workplace ethics and etiquette. This is one that's important to us. A lot of our mentors don't do this one, but this is the one where we talk about, are they adaptable? Are they reliable? We have them do some administrative tasks as well as more ranch hand tasks. So we want to rate, are they reliable with those inside chores as well as the outside chores? If they really want to move into management, they need to learn how to time manage so they have time for the inside work as well as the outside work. Communication, conflict, respectful debate. Do they ask for feedback? So in my mind, these are professional skills. In order to be able to function in a very high risk, demanding, exhausting livelihood, knowing how to take care of yourself, knowing how to get along with other people, not just swallowing conflict, but actually learning how to resolve it. In my mind, those are professional skills. So I include this. These may not be things that you feel you want to be paying attention to with this level of detail, and that's perfectly fine. And then because we include our apprentices in some of our business decisions, we also have a business planning and finance sheet. So again, this is super detailed. There is no expectation that you're doing something with this level of detail, but this is what we do. So I will send it out as well as one that's much more sort of streamlined. So let me go back to one that's probably more relevant. Does anybody have any questions about like creating your skills sheet? I think that's what I'm really wanting to focus on here, which is before your apprentice arrives, you want to make your skills sheet. Because in the first week, you're going to be doing your first meeting with them about the skills sheet. Your NAP staff person can help you create your skills sheet. I'm happy to help you create your skills sheet, and we will send out these examples. But it really comes down to what are the things that you want to teach this season to your apprentice. If you don't plan to put them on a tractor, you don't put tractor on your skill sheet. Well, I know this is a lot to kind of digest right now. So like I said, these will go out in the notes. And then if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to jump on a call or do some email. I'm happy to help you design your skills sheets. So just really briefly, the way that the NAP program asks you to work with your skills sheet is that in the first week to 10 days that your apprentice arrives, you'll have a baseline meeting. Now, you're really not going to know how capable they are with these skills because they just arrived. They haven't spent enough time there. So it's understandable that you probably can't rate whether they are a novice or whether they actually are capable of daily operations or whether they're somebody who's highly skilled at this particular thing. So the important thing about that very first meeting is that the apprentice by themselves has time to go through the skill sheet and rate themselves. Where do they think their incoming skill level is with all of the things you've placed on your skill sheet? As you can see in this land management and stewardship sheet, our incoming apprentice that year rated themselves quite low. They gave themselves a 1. This is a 0 to 5 scale, with 0 meaning I have no idea what you're talking about, 3 meaning I'm more or less capable of daily operations, and 5 meaning mastery, meaning this is something I know really, really well. You could leave for 3 months and I would be able to successfully handle this. So this person gave themselves a 1 almost across the board. We talked, and then we talked with them about why they rated themselves the way they did. You can see they gave themselves a 4 in monitoring. That's because this particular person had worked on a ranch the prior year, and most of what they had done was manage the monitoring program for that operation. They had spent very little time doing anything else. So they came to us with a lot of skills and a lot of understanding about monitoring methodologies. They could have run our monitoring program. So that's why they had a 4. Now, looking at this, somebody who gives themselves all 1s and then gives themselves a 4, like you go, what the heck? What's going on with that? So it was the conversation that we had with them that helped illuminate where were the places where they already had skill and could be useful, and where were the places where we were going to need to do some pretty heavy duty training right away so that they could get up to speed. So that's the process. The apprentice scores themselves individually, and then you sit down with them and discuss that. And based on that conversation, you may or may not be able to give them a number rating yourself. And then there's a comments column for you, just like if there's something to go, oh, we're really excited about teaching you this, or here's a recommendation of something you might read in order to develop some more understanding. You can see that by May, on where it says evaluation 1, that person had gone up to a 2 or a 3 almost across the board. So this was obviously somebody who was highly motivated. So basically in 2 months, they moved from somebody who really wasn't particularly useful to us to somebody who was quite useful. And the skills sheet helped them see that, and it helped us see that. So that's one of the reasons why the skills sheets are important. So again, we'll talk about this more at the next meeting. I'm happy to jump on a call with anybody about this. And this is something that your NAP director or manager can help you with. So I'm going to stop sharing this so that I can finish running through the call before we run out of time. So this just kind of reinforces what I was saying, which is, so the skills sheet helps you download what are the things you want to teach them. What are the skills you absolutely know you want them to develop? Those are the ones you probably want to put towards the top of your list. What skills are built in to the chores and duties you're going to have your apprentice do? And are there other things that they're interested in that may or may not fit? So you kind of have to have a thought process about all of that. And then there's just this little thing that shows you that, like in April, because we're calving, the animal husbandry skill sheet is the one that we're really going to be focusing on in April, because those are going to be the skills that we're asking them to work on every single day. So in April, they're not going to be really working on plant ID, and we're not going to be welding. We're not going to be doing a whole lot of other things that may be on other skills sheets, because the top priorities of that month are things related to a very particular skills sheet. So that's just kind of how all of these puzzle pieces fit together. So lastly, one of the things that is also pretty significantly different from being an employer to being a mentor is having check-in conversations. And like I said earlier, in our program, a check-in isn't necessarily just about how is the work going, but it is how are you going personally. Being a mentor means you're investing in the person, not just as a worker. So these are just a couple of examples of ways to do a check-in. We do ask our mentors to do check-ins on a relatively regular basis. But we also know it's really hard to fit in the time and energy to do those. So we try to give you some sort of simple tools that may or may not be effective for you. And we'll talk about this more in the March meeting as well. So fast and simple. I really love this one. I think it's a pretty easy one to incorporate. You can ask these questions with your apprentice when you're driving from one field to another, when you're putting tools away at the end of the day. These could be questions you ask during your weekly team meeting. You could be having a cup of coffee when you come in out of the snowstorm. These are questions just to try to ask, once a week, at least twice a week. What was a win? What's something that's going well for you right now? What's something that could be going better? And what's a pressing concern? I highly recommend those 3 questions. They're relatively simple to remember. Don't be surprised if the first few times you ask these questions, they basically don't say a whole lot. Most people aren't used to bosses asking them how they're going, how they're doing. My experience and the experience of NAP mentors is that if you ask these questions relatively frequently, usually by the 2nd month, you're going to start to hear some really important things that'll help you be a better mentor, which in turn helps your apprentice be a better worker. Some of the other questions you can consider are things like, how do you feel you're progressing with this particular skill? When I'm explaining things to you, do I give you too much information? Do I give you too little information? Do I go too fast? Do you need a refresher? Is there something that we've talked about, but it feels a little murky? They're going to see that you are super busy and they're going to be hesitant, or they're going to struggle to figure out when is a good time to ask a question. So a check-in sometimes can just be, do you have any questions? Is there anything that's been a little confusing lately? That let's talk about it a little bit more thoroughly. And then a wellness check. Like I said at the beginning of this call, your apprentice is going to be disoriented when they arrive, and they're probably going to be lonely. They've left everything that's familiar, and they've come and joined you in a place that's very familiar to you, where you have a lot of a support network, hopefully. So you might periodically ask them, hey, have you had time to talk to your family or friends lately? Or if you notice that they're tired, they're making mistakes, and normally they don't, you might just say, hey, I've noticed lately that you seem to be having a split focus, or you seem a little tired. Is there something going on? Would it be helpful to be able to sleep in an extra hour or 2 sometime next week so that you can kind of get a little rest? So a check-in is just sort of, it's like we check on our animals, we check on our machinery, we check our bank balances, but we don't tend to check on our people. But our people are one of our most important resources. So how can we sort of be as thoughtful with checking in with them as we are with other elements of our operation? The most important thing, tell them when they do well. I don't know about all of you, but I know for a lot of people who grow up in farming and ranching, the only time you ever heard anything was when you screwed up. Our experience in our program is that does not work with the next generation that's coming into agriculture. They are deeply motivated. They want this to be what they're going to do with their lives, but they also want to feel like their cup is getting filled up. And one of the things that fills our cups, this is true for all of us, is when somebody tells us we did something well, when somebody tells us we made a difference. They need that just as much as you do. So try to build in some sort of opportunity to regularly let them know when they do well. And then lastly, try to have fun. Yes, indeed, we had a very large watermelon once, and we decided we were all going to wear it as a hat. It was a great day. These pictures make all of us happy. So this is George and the 3 young people who were working for us 2 years ago. So I'm not saying you have to wear watermelons as a hat, but I am saying look for the places where you can have fun, where you can demonstrate how much you find joy and fulfillment in your work, because that will help them find joy and fulfillment in it as well. So that's what I have for you. I know that was kind of a fire hose of information. Does anybody have anything in particular that they think they're going to want